Well, thank you for joining us tonight. As Petra mentioned before, this is the second time we've done this presentation this year, but we didn't record it properly the first time. So hopefully if you're watching this in the recording, we were successful this time. This is an opportunity for both learners and parents to better understand how we're communicating their success or their learning as they spend time in what used to be a physical classroom and now, under special circumstances, is the virtual or sort of the home-based classroom. So as Petra sort of said in the preamble before we started recording, everything is kind of the same, but it's like our theme from our meeting the other night. It's the same, but different, because on the one hand, our philosophies haven't really changed, but the sort of way that we have to think about them is different because everything is different right now. So it's kind of a nice time to revisit some of this. And again, we welcome your questions as for our live audience tonight as we go. And if you are watching this on the replay and something comes up that you're curious about or wondering about or have a question about, don't ever hesitate to send us an email and we can, of course, have a conversation with you that way as well. All right, so our agenda tonight is pretty simple and straightforward. We're going to give a very high-level overview of kind of what our assessment philosophy is and how that translates into a methodology. So kind of like what we believe and what does that actually look like for the students. Hopefully the kids know what we're talking about. They're actually pretty good at giving this part of the presentation themselves because they actually live this every day. And another one of our hopes and aims with this presentation is that if you are watching with your student or after the fact, you can have a conversation with them and ask them to show you much of the stuff we're going to show you tonight. They can show you on their iPad and walk you through what it actually looks like to be a PLP learner. So we'll go through that very quickly, and then we'll spend a little bit more time answering sort of the big three questions that we're often asked by parents, especially new parents to PLP. How do I know what my child is learning? Because they don't have textbooks in the conventional way or a binder full of worksheets. How do I know what they're actually supposed to be learning? Where can I see teachers' feedback on student performance? So how do I actually see what the teachers are saying about what my child is producing? And then finally, all that feedback is great, but how does it convert to grades? And this is true maybe for all grade levels, but really is probably becomes more of acute interest for, say, grade 10, 11, and 12s who are starting to think about how the currency of grades translates into a post-high school world as well. So as we said before, questions are welcome at any time. Please, we can talk forever. So let us focus, make sure we focus tonight on what you want to know by steering the conversation if you'd like to. Okay, with that in mind, Petra, maybe I'll pass over this first slide to you.
All right, so we really believe in PLP and the Performance Learning Program about student agency. I talked a little bit about this last week. We are always asking students to move to the empowerment side of this scale, which this is not a complete scale. When I first started teaching, compliance is the norm, and for the most part, our students are compliant in general, I'd say, in our school. And occasionally engaged, but what I love to see is when they are empowered. And this comes from two authors below. You can see them, both educators, who talk about the idea that students learn best and humans learn best when we have agency over our learning, when we feel empowered. And that's really what it comes down to. So everything we're going to talk about tonight is trying to get at a way to empower our students.
You want to take the next one too?
Sure. And that empowerment comes really, and that agency comes because through the idea of students owning their own learning. And when they own their learning, they are all these things you see on there. We don't think these come naturally, right? Some do for sure. There are students who are going to be born with geeky interests. There are students who are going to be born to be problem solvers, maybe both at once. There are students who are born project managers. our goal is to help all our students have that agency and be able to translate that agency across all these different areas. Because if they do own their own learning, they get to do all these wonderful things. And the world today demands this. And so that's really what we're aiming for in everything we're doing in instruction, but especially when it comes to the idea of assessment, which is really what tonight is about.
Yeah, and I would just add that we're firm believers, as Petra said, that these are not innate skills, but that they need to be taught and practiced. And that's why several years ago, in sort of our search for how best to meet students' needs, we really, our ideas and our thinking coalesced around the idea of project-based learning as the way to best access that sort of deeper learning and provide those authentic opportunities for these skills to be introduced, practiced, and then to be reflected upon. So no surprise to all of you. I know, as you've heard various versions of our presentations before, but PBL, or project-based learning, is the way that it's our instructional point of view. So we feel it's the best way to encapsulate all of these skills and opportunities, not in any way diminishing, the importance of content or the importance of having a firm understanding of essential materials or processes like writing. However, it's putting them in a context that answers that question, well, why are we learning this? And allows students to hopefully extend beyond just what would be expected in other classrooms. Tonight's meeting is really all about kind of that assessment and grading and reporting part of a student's experience. So really, we used to often say that we were a little bit out on ahead of the curve. Well, the interesting thing with education and with the ministry of late is that the rest of the education system is kind of caught up with where we have been. So what you're looking at on screen here is actually coming straight from the Ministry of Education and is now the competency-based assessment proficiency scale that all educators are really supposed to be using to guide their assessment. And you see it is a continuum. It is talking about the proficiency a student demonstrates with these essential learning competencies. So there's been a lot of talk in the last few years about the new curriculum, which really, since we've been trying it out, testing it, using it in elementary school, now it's actually been the curriculum, not the new curriculum, for several years. And even at secondary now, it has been rolled out, and it should be being taught in all subjects at all grade levels at this point. But it's a focus away from just rote memorization and just repeating of content to looking at how we use content in context. So in teacher speak, those are called curricular competencies, and the assessment is supposed to be looking at how the students perform these competencies. Are they at that accomplished level, which is a complete understanding of the concepts relevant to the expected learning? Or are they kind of somewhere a little bit further down the scale where they're just emerging with their understanding and they're emerging with their demonstrations, developing those demonstrations? Or are they truly demonstrating a sophisticated understanding all the time, and they're at that extending level? This has been a shift for all teachers, and this year was really the largest shift that PLP made, because our assessment now is completely based on competency-based assessment. So all of the project work that students do, they, at the outset, when a project begins, are told, hey, here are the competencies that we are including in this project. Here's what the performances that we're expecting to see might look like. And then as the project progresses, which Petra's going to talk about in just a moment, this is what we are coaching, developing, offering the feedback on, working towards an end product at the end that has allowed the student to have many opportunities to demonstrate where they are at on this scale. Petra, add anything?
No, I just was going to, the only thing I'd add is Brian talked a little bit about how this has been the shift in British Columbia, of course, under the new curriculum, but it's been very interesting. And I know a lot of times, and one of the questions that we sometimes get asked is, well, yes, but what about universities or these kind of things? There's been a lot of really interesting conversations around this at the post-secondary level because what the harsh reality is that, you know, if you're applying to law school and everybody has 99%, how do you determine Brian's 99% versus Petra's 99%? And really what they're finding, and this is really true at all the Ivy League schools in the United States and things like that, is they're actually moving towards, of course, yes, the resume building and the interviews and those conversations, but there's a new push towards a competency-based reporting of some kind out of secondary schools in actual fact, because, okay, they 99% because they can spew back the content we shove down their throats, but do they have a sophisticated understanding of that? And that's where the competency-based conversation has become really interesting in the post-secondary world. And even if you just do a brief Google search, there's many post-secondary institutions who are trying to develop, and there's even like petitions for a competency-based reporting form of some kind that's standardized across universities. So it's really an interesting time to be an educator because it is requiring these shifts.
Hi, Sherry. I see, thank you for joining us tonight. I see a great question from you in the chat box asking, is this the key to the Shobi emojis? And I should have actually mentioned that because I said that this is not something PLP developed. This is the ministry's scale. It is the ministry's scale, but the ministry scale does not come with these nice emojis. So yes, early in the, actually last summer when the PLP teachers were meeting, we were thinking, okay, if we're going to move to this, how are we going to have a shorthand for communicating both to parents and to students via Shobi, which we're going to talk about a little bit in just a second, where we think different pieces of work the students are doing fall on this competency scale. So we settled on weather emojis. So you can sort of see those above the scale there, sort of from the cloud with sun to the rainbow, sort of showing a progression along the scale. And that's, yes, those are what you will see in Shobi, and Petra will be mentioning that later on. So thank you for that question. Okay, so we mentioned before that our instructional point of view is project-based learning. We are heavily influenced by some of the thought leaders in this area, primarily among them the Buck Institute for Education, which now goes under the name PBL Works, which is a nonprofit organization out of the United States, but really they do work all around the world. And they are endowed by some millionaire who gave them money to basically help spread the message about how PBL can help really access, like I said before, deeper learning and in more authentic learning. And they've done a lot of work around this idea of a project path. And it's one that we've kind of modified a little bit for how we think best meets the needs of our learners. But you're going to see that it's actually a very deliberate sequence of steps that help introduce the idea of a project to a student all the way through to that building knowledge and like gaining that core understanding of content, the actual developing critique of working on some kind of demonstration or performance of that knowledge, and then finally that presenting it, that sharing it with the world, the reflective look back at what worked well, what didn't work well, what we learned, what we still needed to know at the end. And these stages are exactly how we present projects to the students. We do that I'm going to come back to that slide in a second. We do that in an app, in a software package called Basecamp. And that's really what we want to walk through from the parent side today about, well, what's my kid supposed to be doing? What are all these projects? How are they structured? How do I know that they're actually learning something? That all is a conversation that we create as teachers in Basecamp and give and push out to the students. So Petra's going to walk through that in just a moment. I'll go back one step here to the slide I went over. Is the project path, is the steps. What the actual tasks that students are asked to do are grouped into two categories. So we have milestones, which are the big must-see rocks in the stream. right? So if we were to go from one bank to the other bank on a stream, we would be stepping on these rocks to get across. They are essential. Without them, as teachers, we don't feel we've seen the necessary learning to say a student has been successful at whatever the learning outcome is. Along the way, we might create smaller steps, smaller assignments, smaller little tasks, stepping stone things that help scaffold the learning or help a student prepare for and be successful at the bigger milestones. So again, in Shobi and sometimes in Basecamp, you'll see these emoji icons to indicate whether an assignment or a piece of work is a milestone or is a stepping stone. Petra, do you want to talk a little bit about how we're adapting this path in light of current circumstances?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is a side note. If you're watching this later on, of course, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic right now. So what we quickly realized is the projects we had planned, because PLP is, of course, uniquely positioned that we tend to meet, you know, the previous May to sort of plan out the path for the next year. So we had done that and quickly realized some of our projects would actually, I think universally all our projects went forward in some form or the other, but they needed adjustment. So for the most part, the things that went were the stepping stones. So we talked to the kids last week when we first met with them after this and promised them there would be probably far fewer stepping stones, because the stepping stones are the things along the way that sort of keep us online more than even the kids even, I'd say. So there might be like a graphic organizer to help us make sure they understood a concept, or even a little quiz, or some type of formative along the way type of assessment check-in. And what we told the kids was because of the circumstances and what is happening now, we wanted to limit those stepping stones to things that we really would help them achieve the milestones. So we've drawn ourselves back as teachers. We've also drawn the milestones back too as well. I think we've thought very carefully about the things that are really going to demonstrate those competencies. So if we are asking your students right now to do a task, if we're asking the learners to do something, it's because we really do see that there's some type of learning or value or skill that's coming out of course. We believe that all along, but not all tests are equal. they aren't necessarily. So in this case, we really are trying to get things down to the things that we really think will help them moving forward and that they'll enjoy doing or understand doing.
Okay, I'm just going to pause for 1 minute to see if people have any questions, and if anyone wanted to be brave enough to actually speak, you'd be more than welcome to, because we've already gone over and give you some big vocabulary there, the idea of the project path, stepping stones and milestones, because we're going to be sort of using and throwing around those words now. So if anyone wanted to seek any clarification or have any questions.
So there's some things in the chat. So when I show you Shobi, hopefully about the incomplete or the late, that there'll be some more clarity around that. I would love to say we're universally good at this in terms of like the PLP teaching team, but there are some slight differences between teachers that maybe come out a bit more in Shobi than anywhere else. So we'll try to explain that a little bit more about why that is and how that works as well.
Okay, perfect. I see Emily has joined us now too. I know she couldn't join us a little bit earlier. So Emily, at any time, if you want to disagree with something we've said or add something, please don't hesitate to do so. All right, so we've just gotten to
hello.
Yes. We've just gotten to the point where we're going to discuss Basecamp. So Basecamp is home to the project path. This is where, this is the most conventional part, I guess, of how we teach, because this is the akin or the equivalent of a textbook or of the handouts or the things that you would normally expect teachers to be providing and giving their students. We like Basecamp because it's actually not educational software. It's actually professional business use project management software. And they very generously offer it to schools for free. We've been very happy using it, and it actually has it lives on the web, so it allows us to do things like embed video and links and be much more dynamic and current than you could be with paper. So Petra's going to walk through a little bit about what Basecamp looks like when the students receive a project, and how that maps with the project path that we looked at before. So you can sort of see that intent of how students move through a learning experience.
Great. So I'm going to take over the screen and I will pull up Basecamp. If everything works the way I think it will, we should see it right now. So what you're seeing is the same as what the students see. When they come into Basecamp, it looks a little different because I'm on my Mac than the iPad. It's pretty similar. You'll see across the top, they have options to always go home. There's some pings. They can actually create their own chats with each other, which we really enjoy, because that means they're searchable and we can monitor them. So we do encourage the students to use that instead of like iMessage, because this way they can actually contact each other. We had some great examples of that, even with the students planning for Destination Imagination for the online tournament on Monday. We had groups immediately making little chat groups and including us, so we could see what they were talking about, which I like as well. And the Hey button on the student side always pulls up like anything new. So any notifications I'm getting, those kind of things. Activity always shows what the latest things people have done is. My stuff would be stuff that's assigned to me and other places I visited recently. And then the really big thing, and this is on the sidebar on the iPad, I should have mentioned, is the find button. So at any time, if your student is lost or they can't find a post in Basecamp, really hit that search button that's find, because if I even just search my own name, what it does was pull up my card, but it also mentions every time that thing has been noted, right? So yes, it's every comment I've made, but it's also anything I've said or done. So it's a really helpful feature. So if a student thinks they can't find something, that find button is really useful for that. Okay, so when they get to home or they hit their sort of home bar, they will see all their projects. Now, obviously I have way more projects than they will have, because I'm like seeing all the projects in PLP at the moment. They can actually pin the projects, which is what I do as well. So I see only the projects I'm currently involved with or going on right now. They should all have a Learner Central, which is kind of like the depository right now. We're using it during the pandemic, during the COVID-19, to see all the orders of the week. So you're getting a bit of behind the scenes view here, because you're seeing the drafts for next week already. And you can see that each grade has a folder right now, and that's where we're putting their directions to know what's going on for the orders of the week. So this is kind of just a high level view of Basecamp, which really is separate than the conversation I want to have, which is about the grading level of Facebook. Like, what does a project path look like, and how do we know if the student's learning, and that, so on and so forth. So I'm actually going to pull up an old project, or a project that's completed, because the ongoing projects are a work in progress at the moment, and really don't show the whole path the way that it will by next week once your teachers catch up to you. So I'm actually going to pull up one from Humanities 10 that we did just before the break, called Alike in Dignity, which was a parody of Romeo and Juliet. So you always can see the title, and we tend to refer to our projects. We think long and hard about the titles, and we do collaborate with each other to try to get titles that actually talk to the project or the ideas that we're sharing as well. And then within the project, you'll see different tools. This one only has the docs and files turned on. Sometimes you'll see a campfire where there's like little chats can go on if there's something specific to the project, or a message board sometimes where there's threads back and forth, or some other things like a calendar and so forth. But the basic part that's most like a binder in Basecamp, and the most part for the project path, and the most important, is the docs and files. So in the docs and files, no matter what project you open in PLP, this is what you'll see. And it's always color coded, and it's always got those emojis as well to help you guide the students and ourselves really through the project. The main folder, the white one that by default, is the project plan and milestones. So like Brian was saying earlier with milestones, they're those big rocks in the stream. So if a student didn't look into any of these folders, like launch or building knowledge or developing critique or present and reflect, and they only went to the project plan and milestone, it's totally possible that they could do the work. The problem becomes that they will not get the full benefit of building those stepping stones along the way. I mean, they can leap from boulder to boulder, but from time to time they might fall in the creek, right? We want them as much as possible to be being able to take those small steps and build on them. But a project always begins here, because we always have a project path here that explains what the student is going to be doing. And during the launch, at some point, the teacher will overview this. And this is always a good key to ask yourselves and come back to with a student to know, what are we doing here, right? There's always the driving question, the project description, what are they making? Why are they doing it? And you'll notice it always lays out the path. And again, that color coding, right? Here's what you're doing in the launch milestone. Here's what we're going to build knowledge on. Here's how we're going to develop and critique that project. And eventually, here's how we're going to present it. And you'll notice that this says download or replace with new version because it is more than one page, right? So if you actually scroll down, what you'd see below that is the deadlines for those milestones, and whether it's an individual milestone or if it's a group milestone. So this template is used by everyone. We all use it. It's there in everybody's project path. I'll just pause there for a second. So when the students come, say for a launch, we would probably direct them to the launch folder, and we do these activities. And most of these are going to be stepping stones. There might be something attached to them. There might not be. It might be a conversation we read in class. So for example, in this project, we started with, who the heck was this William Shakespeare guy? We watched a couple of little videos together about it. And then you'll see there is nothing else attached here. This was mainly because in class, we just went through it. We had the conversation, we talked about who William Shakespeare was. Then we talked a little bit about the Elizabethan times and the theater, right? And again, you can see that it's all here, just like in a regular classroom, this might have been printed out and I'd hand it out to the students. Even in the same class, and this is in the same day even, we talked about what it was like to live in Italian times, right? We set up that again. And then again, in that same class, then we came back to why is it Shakespeare? We watched one more video, and all of that was one class. And we finished with an anticipation guide where they actually went through in Notability and sort of ranked what they thought about these things. And again, you can see this is a really good example of something that's a stepping stone. You can see I had them do it in class. They did something individual. We did it as a group. We discussed it. I think there was a hand and spot in Shobi just to confirm it, but it's the kind of thing where I'm not going to go through in detail, mark did they put the X correctly under the individual box as opposed to the group. This was something along the way that we did in class to check it out. Now, that being said, all of these activities in the launch do feed into that first milestone. And again, notice the color coding. When I come back to the project plan and milestone, that first milestone, which says in the project path, it's under launch, directly draws on that knowledge. So again, there's nothing to say. If the student wasn't in class, could they have read this entire thing, written an analysis paragraph, figured it out? Probably. But are they going to have a richer understanding from that conversation in class and being present? Yes. So of course I said, we did this, we talked about why Shakespeare. And then as Brian said, here's those competencies. What am I looking for in your opening study of the play? Well, I'm looking to see, did you share your ideas when you wrote Spoke and Represent? And did you take a historical perspective? Did you overcome your current concerns, beliefs, or values to understand those of people in the past? Those are pretty big ideas. And if you look at the new curriculum, the number of competencies we have to address in a course are anywhere from 5, say, to English to a few more in different I think 6 in social studies. So in humanities, say, we'd be covering 11 competencies throughout the year. And so what that means is we have a chance to revisit those. So this project might be the first time we actually do this communicate competency. It might be the first time we go through take historical perspectives. So when I look at the milestone for the launch task, I'm not expecting on the emoji scale that the first time in launch that they're getting rainbows, that they're extending their understanding. I'd be shocked if they were. If they were, then I always say to the kids, if you were extending on everything you did, why are you in my class, right? We're all learning and growing. So when we start out, that's where the starting out begins. And most of our students will do fairly well off the top. So in this particular launch activity, their task was to write a paragraph that looks at the activities we did in the last couple of classes and answer the question, why Shakespeare? Consider the competencies I'll be assessing you in response. And you can see, if you missed or the students don't remember or don't go back to the project sheet, we always repeat, how are you completing this? This is individual. When was it due? January 8th. How do you hand it in? It's going to be a pages document to Shobi, right? So it's right here and clearly written out and hopefully being able to be followed. And then the same thing goes for the other pieces of the project path. The building knowledge is the information they need to get to that point where they present and reflect. In this project, they presented live on stage a modern day parody of a scene in Romeo and Juliet by themselves. So in order to get there in the building knowledge, we obviously studied Romeo and Juliet, but that isn't enough if you're going to create a parody. We had to do a whole building knowledge section on how do you create a parody. And both of these things are happening at the same time, right? Maybe within the same class, we might read the chorus and maybe look at a parody of, from Saturday Night Live. And that is what project-based learning is all about. We're taking the information that the students need to create a real world and authentic task as they need it. And then the project goes back and forth, right? There may be some building knowledge where you move into developing critique. And in this case, that was the case. So my two stops along the way for this was they created a backdrop for their presentation and they created a script. And both these things were done before they even did a rehearsal. So when they handed in a script, again, this is why project-based learning is one of those continuums. If they handed in a script that I felt missed the idea of what a parody was, maybe the whole class missed it, then the project path goes back. We go back into building knowledge a little bit and spend a bit more time on what a parody is, right? Or maybe when I came to creating a backdrop, I realized, I should have had a building knowledge piece about how to create a digital backdrop. And we'd maybe go back into that. And that's what the PBL is about. And then eventually we did do a present and reflect. And in this case, we actually did do an essay as well. And you don't see often, I don't know, it kind of depends on the teacher. Often there isn't a lot in the present and reflect folder because it's kind of the one where we get to and we've been explaining the project all along so they know what to do by the time we get there. But sometimes there's some things, and in this case, we actually did write an essay at the end as well. So there was the essay topics in there. And again, you can always see what those launch or what the milestones are along the way from launch in the building knowledge, and they kind of mirror each other. So I said in building knowledge, they needed to know the play along the way and the parodies. So that was the twill post, the This Week I Learned. They wrote blog posts every week. They also did that literary analysis essay, like I was talking about, on the play. There's the one for one. They wrote a script and handed it in to me. They did a backdrop and soundscape. And then in the end, they presented their parody. And again, there wasn't a lot in that folder because, again, it's all here as a reminder. When were you doing it? Where were you doing it? What am I looking for as you do it? And then ideally, because it is a project path, the plan is that if students are launched out and you see those competencies are the same throughout the whole project, if they're beginning the project and maybe they were emerging at Communicate, our goal is that by the end, they've merged along that assessment continuum. They've moved along in their competency, their proficiency has improved. So it's, if there's one thing I'd share about the sort of feedback and when we get to Shobi is that it's not always bad to be emerging or developing. That's part of the learning along the way. You can't always be extending. It's not realistic to think that. And I
think we have some good questions about Basecamp in the chat, so I'll just give voice to those before we move on. So
just one last thing before we do that, Fred. I'll just point out that in the project plan and milestone folder, that proficiency scale Brian was showing is always here as well. So for students, so they can always reference it just to remind themselves. Okay, carry on.
So a couple questions about parent access to Basecamp. So I mentioned before that it's not an education tool, so it's not quite as elegant to add parents as Shobi is. However, it can be done. And we have, in the fall, we did, I sent a very long, so maybe some people didn't read it, email that covers all of what we're talking about tonight, but kind of like in a poster style. And maybe I'll dig that up and send it again. And that had instructions on it on how to have parents attached to Basecamp. Alternatively, you can always just email me. So I see a couple people in the chat interested in having parent access to Basecamp. If I've made notes of who they are, but if I forget to, or you don't get an email from Basecamp asking you to create your account, make sure you just follow up with an email and harass me, and I will make sure you do get that. Excuse me, the only thing that's a little, again, inelegant about that is teachers have to remember to add parents to each project. The students are all grouped together, so that's kind of default, but sometimes you forget to add parents. So sometimes if you are a parent and you haven't seen a new project that your student is talking about, maybe you might have to shoot an email to the teacher to remind them. Another question too about parent access to Learner Central, and that's something I can do as well. The Orders of the Week website that you're all accessing, if you're checking out thisweek.ccove.ca, actually is Learner Central Basecamp. It's just on a public page that doesn't require an account to access. All right, maybe we should just pause for 1 second to see if there's any other Basecamp centered questions before we move on.
I just would point out, I totally encourage the parent access and do encourage you to do it. But I do really encourage you as well as families to think about that learner agency and have the conversation with your learner, because the powerful thing is when they can open the, you know, it's the age-old conversation about learning that if they can explain it to you, they are also learning from that. So if they have to walk you through the Basecamp project, it might remind them as well, as much as it might also inform you. So I'm happy to add the parents, that's not a problem, but also just encourage you to have those conversations with the learners for their own sake as well. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna just screen share back on the slides from before, because we'll go a little faster with Shobi. Okay, I think, Petra, are we seeing them?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so yeah, Basecamp. A total side note here that if you're curious about Basecamp at all, I mentioned that they give it to us for free. They've actually launched sort of a little side product of their own called Basecamp Personal or something like that, that allows you to use the software like to plan your wedding anniversary or a renovation or any kind of project that you need to like manage. And so if people are curious and want to, you can just go to basecamp.com and actually use it yourself. It's actually great software. So it's an unsolicited and unpaid for ad. There you go. Okay, so what we're always asked too, especially by new parents to PLP, is like, all sounds great, but I'm not getting anything back from teachers, you know, a paper quiz with 10 out of 10 or 5 out of 10 on the top. So how do I know how my kid is doing? Where can I go and see what teachers are saying about the work that they're doing? We've been using Shobi now for many years, and actually it has gotten better and better as a tool. And we think that it's fantastic because not only does it work great for us with the iPad in sort of an electronic document world, but it actually facilitates a really rich conversation around learning. And we're excited that parents can have their own account to have a window into that conversation. So again, I think I'll pass it back to Petra, and she's going to basically just walk you through what a parent might see in Shobi.
Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen here is actually the teacher view, but it's what a parent would see if they open a particular assignment. So you can see, as Brian was showing, and I think I can do this. No, I can't. It's okay. You can see on up in the left corner where it says milestone 2. So you can see we try to be consistent about saying if a piece of work that's being handed in through Shobi is something, oh, there, Brian's marking it. If a piece of work that we're requiring of students is a milestone, one of those big rocks in the stream, it is usually, almost always, I think we're pretty clear, near 100% on this, about using the gemstone, like marking it and saying milestone whatever and identifying it. But for sure, the student should know and be reminded of that. So it should correspond always with a Basecamp post in that folder where I was showing you about the projects. So the directions will not be in Shobi. They will need to go to Basecamp for those directions. And then they return to Shobi. Shobi is really just where they hand stuff in and where we give comment on the stuff they've handed in. So in this particular case, you can see there was a lot of back and forth between myself, Ms. Maxwell, the student, about how to improve on their work and things that they did. So Shobi always shows the most recent thing at the top. Okay, and the oldest thing at the bottom. It's in reverse order. So you can see the first thing was that, and the blue bubble down at the bottom shows that it's something from me. And I had written that this was journal 3, was due November 4th. And then you can see the comment. Oh, sorry, Brian. Did you say something?
No, go ahead.
I can see that this was a comment where I typed in, that was actually a comment from Ms. Maxwell, which is somewhat confusing, but you know, what she had learned from it or what was missing. She then handed in another version of it. So what you're seeing there is the document that the student had handed in. And you can see it actually is something she's handed in. And it has this little red mark, which is like a little circle on it, which actually means that the teacher has written something on it. So on the next slide, we'll show you that. Then this is a comment from the student where she's written the thing she was going to do. Then there's another version she's handed in. And again, you can see on this one that there's a paper clip. The paper clip actually indicates that the student wrote something on it. So I'll show you that in a minute. Then you can see she's done another version of it. She said, this is why. Then yet another version. And again, that red mark means the teacher's written something, and then a final version. So if you tap on an assignment in Shobi, this is what you'd see, is probably that back and forth. Now, most assignments don't have this many back and forth. It looks a little different on the student side, which I can't really show you because I'm not a student, unfortunately. But on your student side, they can show you some of that back and forth. The key things to keep an eye on are, and I know someone mentioned earlier about the late work. So the late work here is that this little red clock. So Brian's highlighting it there. So that little red clock shows that that was late in some way. Now, in this particular case, the reason I'm not too worried about that late mark, and neither should you necessarily be, is that if you look, that's actually the 4th or 5th draft. So the work itself in this case isn't necessarily late, as in she didn't hand it in on time. The reason the clock, and this is the one flaw I can't handle with Shobi, but the software programming would be so complex for this, is that she added a comment and the comment was after the deadline, so therefore it's late. So don't get too worried about these late marks. If it was something down here and we saw that red clock, then I'd be a little bit more concerned. Okay, the last thing I'll say is that you can see here that she's also got the little 2 rainbow emojis there, and that is because eventually she was given a grade. So on the student side, I think it comes up like nearer up here or nearer to the top next to their name of the assignment, and they actually see a grade. Grades always appear in the yellow bubble, and they will always be, like Brian's indicating, an emoji grade, linking back to that competency again. So again, depending where you are in the project path, this is only milestone 2. She's already extending. So again, that shows me she's really developing well in this project, and I'm not concerned about her doing this. So again, this view is the teacher view, so it's a little different than the student view. So as you do open the student view, you'll see that again a little bit differently. All right, Brian, do you want to go on to the next slide?
I'll just also say that one of the reasons it might look a little different is that, and I think Petra did say this particular conversation is more extensive than most probably things collected in Shobi would have. Most things in Shobi would show, let's see if I can figure out my arrowing here, would show the item that the student submitted, and then you may see a teacher comment. Sometimes there's just one comment. Or if we offer feedback saying, here's what we like, we think this needs to be revised though, you might see that as well. Shobi will capture that whole conversation though inside this particular assignment. That's why you see Emily, in this case, has resubmitted a few different times and gotten, and here, this is her comment telling us how this one is changed because of this or such. So it won't always necessarily look like this much feedback from the teacher, because different pieces of assessment, different assignments, stepping stones or milestones might have different amounts of teacher comments. In fact, sorry, go ahead, Petra.
No, you finish.
I was just going to say, our practice is that stepping stones don't necessarily receive any teacher commentary. So often stepping stones are collected just so we can have a little look into what the student's doing. And often there won't actually be any teacher feedback or critique. Milestones, though, the ones with the little gemstone here, are those major assignments. They're the ones that should definitely be receiving teacher attention and commentary, critique, and eventually receive the performance indicators. You probably will not necessarily see performance indicators on stepping stones.
And I was just going to say, in regards to if the assignment is not there at all, generally my practice, and this is where there's a little bit of difference, but my practice is generally to put in the grading bubble something like incomplete, or but
well,
I
please hand this in. Yeah.
Well, please hand this in, or something like that. Because, and I usually only put in incomplete after I've probably written 3 or 4 or more comments in that stream about how is this coming, or what's the timeline on this. So if you're starting to see comments like that from me or a teacher, it probably means they have a milestone that hasn't been handed in, that the teacher's desperately searching for. Because by the time I get to the point where I'm entering an emoji or assessing it, assigning it a spot on the proficiency scale for the competency, if the student hasn't handed it in, it usually is very late by that point. So this is what they see in Shobi when I said that I marked it up. So the purple pen is actually me. And when you're live in Shobi, the student can actually toggle on and off layers. So they can toggle on their own comments. They can toggle on my comments to see all their writing better. So in this case, I actually had the students go through in class when they handed it in, because I wanted to know, where did you make the literary connection? Where did you give personal response? And then I think the other one was, where did you answer the question? So they actually had to go through their work and highlight that for me. And then when I went through one of her drafts, I said, oh, there's just, as you can see, I just highlighted personal response. And I said, looking forward to more of this. Because as she quickly realized when she went through it, oh, I didn't actually make enough of that, or I didn't do enough of that. And that was part of the competency, and I was supposed to demonstrate that. So that's where the multiple drafts comes into play. And most of the time for milestones, that's why we do say, contact us and we can give more information. We can help you know, is it something they should do another draft of, or is this something that's going to be addressed in another milestone again? Because as you see in that project path, if the milestone comes back and circles back to that competency, sometimes it's not necessarily one they need to keep drafting. Maybe it's going to be revisited again, and in that case, it's better to wait. So that assessment conversation is really important for the students to reach out and talk to us about as well.
Okay. I realized I was trying to reply to somebody in the chat message, and I may have replied to somebody else accidentally privately, because for whatever reason, Zoom defaults to the last person who chatted to you. So someone asked if they're receiving Shobi updates, but their husband would also like to. Can they use the same student code? And if you did not get that question answered, the answer is yes, you can. So any parent can go and create a parent account on shobi.com, and then when prompted, enter the student code, and the student code can be used for 2 parents, and then you will have that student attached to your parent account. So yes, okay, perfect. Yes, Susan has her hand raised. It's very exciting. Would you like to speak or, all right.
I would
Yes,
like to speak.
please
Um,
do.
I'm this might not be a question you can answer right now, but I am still confused about Shobi, because I look at Shobi and it doesn't look like what you just showed. So I can see, and I don't know if I'm signed in as Cameron or something, then that's why I can't see what you're looking at, but I see all assignments, and then I see assigned, and then I see collected. And when I go down into collected, I often am not clear on whether things have been actually done or not. Like there's a thing in here that says do this and this, and it says collected, so one would assume it's done, but I'm actually not sure. So I guess at the risk of sounding like a complete Luddite when it comes to
No, not at all.
technology, I actually need somebody to I need to screen share this with you and have you tell me what it is that I need to look
actually,
for.
I think great feedback.
I can answer that, Brian.
Okay, I was just going to say, one thing that is we've sort of neglected to mention, we just jumped right into this screenshot that you're seeing now, is yes, this is like what you're seeing here is not, you've opened Shobi and this is what you see. This is nested down several levels, and this is the specific details of one assignment. So you're right, it would look quite different when you first just open Shobi and see the first views. So Petra, did you want to answer?
Yeah, because I'm just trying to get that view for what the parent sees. So I think what you see is the sort of all, and most of the students immediately go to the all assignments view, which gives a list of all their assignments. I don't understand why they do that, because that stresses me out. I always go just by course. But if you do, so, because I mean, in that case, like if you just clicked on humanities, you just see the humanities assignments by project in their nice little folders, and it's far less stressful than just a long list of all the assignments, because the all assignments removes literally all the folders, so you don't know which project they're attached to. They're all just loose. They're from every class. It is chaotic. But if you click just on the class, you will see them arranged by project. So even right now, I'm just.
Do you want to share your screen?
I can't without showing the kid's name.
Well, yeah, but you're not going to show their work.
Well.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same, like I don't want to show the screen I'm seeing because
Yeah, I'm loath to do that, Brian, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a one-on-one thing, but
what I'd say is that in that view, when you see all the assignments for Shobi's purposes, what they mean by assigned is the things that are either upcoming or the teacher hasn't put a due date on it. Okay, the things that are collected are things that are already supposed to be handed in. That does not matter if the kid has done them or not. It just means that
collected by the teacher.
Yeah. So what really matters in terms of the parent view and the kid view is the paper clip. If there's a paper clip, they put something in the folder. If there's no paper clip, that means they have not done the assignment, they have not put something in there, and the deadline has passed. Maybe we can add some screenshots later on to help with understand that, Brian, where I can.
Well, I think we should maybe consider having a Shobi walkthrough, like a session devoted to that. It might be helpful. Yeah, I think that would be actually quite helpful. We can do it with some anonymized Sammy Seacove data. Okay, so we'll, conscious of the time here, we'll just get to our last item here, and that is, how does the Shobi feedback translate into grades? Because probably you've already realized that, the idea with the emojis, and students have probably already told you that we don't really in fact, almost never, in fact, maybe never, do we grade individual pieces of work. So students really don't come home, like I said, with 10 out of 10 on a quiz or reach the end of a project and get the little handout that says, yep, you met all the requirements of the recipe and here is your, 95 out of 100. But the ministry does require us to translate that feedback into grades at 3 times a year for the 3 reporting periods. So this year we've introduced a tool that helps both students and parents understand how feedback and the competency scale and the demonstrations of the proficiencies translate into grades. So there actually is a formula that has been put forward that takes these different accomplishment levels, the emerging, the developing, the accomplished level, the extending, and converts them to a grade point average.
Sorry, Brian, you're breaking a bit.
Okay, would you want to take over explaining then, and I'll just mute?
So what it does is it uses the formula to convert that information into a grade. So what you're seeing in the student's view is you can see, and sorry, I don't have control of his screen, so I can't circle things, but in the different view, you can see the different competencies they're working with. So here is comprehend, under humanities, connect, create, communicate, and so on and so forth. So each one of those is one of those competencies I was talking about. And there are 10, I think I said 11, there's 10. And if you actually click on any of them, you see the black triangle there, it actually explains what that competency is. So the students can always get what that means. So there we go. So when you click on analyze cause and consequence, it explains what we're looking for is, can they explain who or what influenced events to occur and what the consequences of those events were. And then in the second box below that, what you see is how well they've performed on that competency so far. So if it says not yet assessed, obviously that's in a project that's coming up. If you see extending, they've accomplished that one. They've gone beyond accomplish that one. They've extended their understanding. They've shown that sophisticated understanding in that one. Those boxes also show where the project is going, which projects are showing that competency. So for comprehend in humanities 11, the projects were that they got a chance to demonstrate their understanding of that competency were their tribalism and Lord of the Flies, and then they revisited it in their Macbeth project. So the student attained an accomplished understanding of the comprehend competency during those 2 projects. If this was an assessment after only tribalism and Lord of the Flies, they would know, oh, I know upcoming on the Macbeth project, I'm gonna have a chance to revisit that one, and I'm gonna talk to the teacher about how can I move from accomplished to extending, or whatever the case may be. They also will have all their courses there as well, just so you know. I was just talking to humanities, but as they scroll down the page, they'll see their other courses as well. And then I think Brian is nudging me to point out that up there in Tracker 2.0, so this really right now is only what you'd see if you're in grade 11 or 12, but eventually maybe for the other grades, because in grade 11 and 12, 10, 11, and 12, they get a percentage grade. So those percentages do matter, often more to the student at those grades. At grade 8 and 9, we only report out letter grades, so the percentage is less relevant. But it does give them an idea of where they are. Like if you're a low A, maybe the next year they're going to have to work a little harder to keep an A. But at grade 11 and 12 and grade 10, you can see we've recorded in the version of the tracker the students see now what they got on the report card in each term. So Sammy Seco has done really well in term 1, he got 95, and term 2, that cumulative grade kept going, and he still got a 95. We've also asked all of the students in grade 11 and 12 to tell us as well what their final grade target is. So Sammy said his final grade target, he wants to be at a 95 in humanities. And right now his tracker's saying he's only at 87. So Sammy should be looking ahead, and he should be clicking on those projects and saying to himself, where can I improve? So for example, those three that Brian's highlighting right now, in comprehend and historical significance and take historic perspectives, he's at accomplished. But if he wants a 95, he's going to have to improve some of those to extending. And in the projects that haven't been assessed, the competencies that haven't been assessed in projects yet, he's going to need to think of ways to improve or to meet that extending deadline if he wants to stay at a 95. And that would be the same for PGP down below as well. So this is sort of an ongoing marker of a view into the student's progress that gets turned into that report card. Some students will look at it all the time after the end of every project, which is typically when a teacher goes in and enters assessment into the tracker, is probably at the end of a project, not during the middle, because you can imagine the middle would show that the variations would be huge, right? If we were always changing it, no, they're emerging, no, they're extending. That's the growth piece we're showing. And what we told the students is we're always looking for improvement. So if they are, Sammy Seacope has already demonstrated that he is extending in Create, then in the next project, if we revisited Create, we'd be working on the assumption that Sammy is going to be able to demonstrate extending again. If Sammy was not showing extending in his Create competency during the next time we revisit that project, that's again where the teacher would be having a conversation with the learner and saying, how can we help you achieve this? Why aren't you extending anymore? What's happened? And that's generally true in education. We see students achieve at a certain level and be able to stay with it throughout and improve on it. I think you can turn it back on, Brian. It makes me nervous when it's so quiet.
All right. Thank you for picking that up. I'm sort of just preserving my bandwidth by keeping my camera off for a second. But yeah, that's the end of the formal presentation. So it is a lot to process. We've tried to sort of give you the information that we think would be most helpful, but we'd love to offer an opportunity to clarify anything, or actually we have to pick up on a couple questions that were asked before too that I forgot to ask. So right now I'm looking here. Is there a way to keep incomplete assignments in assigned instead of them moving to collected? No is the simple answer, and that's, as Petra said, that's kind of the way Shobi works. The collected is that the teacher has collected them, not that the student has necessarily completed them. So the way Shobi basically has two high-level containers for assignments. Those that are assigned, meaning the teacher has created them and the due date is in the future, and collected, which is anything that the due date has already passed. So anything that is in the collected is the teacher has already asked students to hand it in. And as Petra said, the way for a parent to just eyeball whether or not student actually did the assignment is to look for the paperclip icon. The paperclip icon means something has been attached to that assignment. So hopefully most of the time that's the file or the link or to whatever the finished work is. It could also be a comment though. So often students will go in there and say, I had a really busy week, I will be handing this in next week. That will also create a paperclip. So sometimes you have to actually go and look at what was attached. But if nothing was attached at all, like you don't see any paperclip, then you know for sure nothing was attached. Can parents have access to the tracker? So yes, they can. In fact, it's a little bit cumbersome to provide. There's no easy way to just turn that on, but on any parent that wants access to it, just please send me an email and I can send you back the link. That's easy enough to do. Echo what Petra said before, we really encourage seeing the tracker as a great opportunity to have a conversation with your students. So if you're able to like sit down with them and say, hey, let's have a look at your tracker, pull it up and look at it together is great. They can show it to you. They certainly all have access to it on their iPads right now. So they can open up Google Sheets on their iPad and they have it for sure. And they all know that they have it because we've spent a lot of time talking about it in class. But if parents want their own independent access, just send me an email. I'd be happy to facilitate that. Does the tracker reflect their final report card grade? It eventually will, but just to clarify, I'll go back to a couple slides here. If I can control my computer. There we go. This score at the top, that's the big number here in big letter grade, is what we tell the kids and what we think of as a raw score. So it is what the tracker is calculating based on the performances, based on the formula. It is not necessarily the grade that will appear on their report card. And in fact, you can see here, there is quite a deviation between what the actual raw tracker score is and what the student, in this case, Sami Sikov, received on his report card. So we are informed by the tracker, but the tracker is not their de facto mark. So there always is a grading conversation between the teachers and students, and often probably, well, historically at this point, their report card grade has been higher than the tracker. The conversation we have with the students is the one that Petra was having about if this is their goal grade and where they want to end up in June, then they now can come here, and this is the tool to show them exactly those areas they need to be working on or demonstrating their proficiency in to get there. So what we're trying to do over the course of the school year is see these two numbers converge. That would be the goal.
And I should just add, I just threw up in the chat that, and I will get Brian to email these out as well. It suddenly occurred to me, Brian and I do, if you know us at all, we do everything the hard way. It just occurred to me, I bet you Shobi has some support documentation on this. And sure enough, they do. So rather than create our own, I've threw in a couple of links there. One about Shobi indicators, what do different things mean, and what did the different icons and symbols mean in Shobi as well. And it's got some good screenshots there as well, in advance of us holding another meeting or talking it through. But there's some cheat sheets there as well. I think that was about that, the tracker and so on and so forth. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Maybe we can pause the recording. I just wondered if somebody had a question not about grading, maybe anything about.
Okay, yeah, we will bring the formal part of the meeting to an end. Thank you. And as we said before, if you're watching this on the recording and something has come up with a question, please don't hesitate to email us. We'd be more than happy to attempt to answer it. So thank you for joining us.